Good morning. It's Brother Gerald, YouTube philosopher, and today is the second video that I'm producing today on August 24th. This video is dedicated to those that are married, those that are in the process of getting divorces, and those that truly love the Lord. And I'm not saying those groups are mutually exclusive. I think there is a overlapping of those groups, in as much as that many people claim to love the Lord, but they really don't have any real relationship with Him, and it's demonstrative by how they live their lives, how they relate to their mate, and what they do in other arenas in this world. Now, I'm going to say that I've been reading the Bible, and it's been very clear that God hates a lot of things. He hates sin. He hates wickedness. He hates idolatry. And He also hates divorce. But we can see in the Bible, in the book of Isaiah, I believe it's the book of Isaiah, where God actually hands the Hebrew people a writ of divorcement, but He hands it to them with this one caveat. He says, for all of your adulterous ways. And God compares the faithfulness of His people in terms of doing what He commands them to do. When they don't do it, He makes an analogy, and He makes their running off to serve and worship other gods as being an adulterous woman. And so He basically serves them a writ of adultery, and He lays down the accusation that I'm getting rid of you as a wife because of these things. But at the end of presenting all these terrible things that the Hebrew people did as an adulterous, spiritual adulterer to the God that created them, He says, but if you would return to me and do those things that you know are right and what you ought to do, what you promised to do, what you vowed to do, what you made a covenant before me to do, if you return to me and continue in these things, I will take you back. And it will be as if nothing ever happened. And so it's at a point where God is demonstrating and showing us that a divorce is definitely allowed. It's something that, even He is going to say, as a righteous and holy God, He's not going to tolerate a wife that's going to be disobedient to Him. But He is loving enough to where if He cuts you loose, He turns you loose, and you see, oh my God, I made a terrible mistake, that He will bring you back. But there is also a point of distinction between people and God, and that God has the power to take life. He has the power to kill. And so we don't have that power to kill in terms of, if our spouse happens to continue to be this adulterous, unfaithful, disrespectful, whatever you want to name, in terms of they made the vow and now they're violating their vow. It gets to a point where the only death that you can have is to leave that person alone and not regard them as being your husband or being your wife. And so there's some passages in the New Testament, and I'm going to give those to you, as well as passages in the Old Testament. And I'm going to give you like maybe 3 in the Old and then 3 in the New. And they'll be in that kind of a series, and they'll line up with what I'm about to tell you. In the New Testament, Jesus talks about, if your right eye offends you or your right arm offends you, pluck it out. It's better, if your eyes offend you, it's better to pluck them out and enter into the kingdom blind or enter the kingdom maimed than to go to hell as a whole person. And then the Old Testament talks about, how the two people become one flesh. And on a certain level, it talks about how having sex with a woman is a spiritual joining of the man with the woman. And it gets to a point of not just, having fun and having sex. And this is another issue we'll talk about in another video, where a woman who has had multiple sex partners has received so much energy from all of these different men that it gets to a point of frustration for her. Like a drug addict, she'll become overdosed on this, to where when she is ready to get into a serious relationship, she can't, because of all of this confusion, this biological confusion that she's imposed upon herself by listening to the society that we live in. That it's, a woman can go out and act like a man, and there's not going to be a negative consequence to pay as a result of doing that. But Jesus also tells of a story of a man who had a wedding celebration, and he invited all of his friends, these people that he knew, that knew him, and that had a certain relationship with him. And all these people came back. One guy says, "Hey man, I just got married, I can't come because I just got married, and please excuse me." Another guy says, "Man, I got some real estate issues to take care of. I got a field to take care of." Another guy said, "I have oxen to test. Please." Everybody's coming up with all these excuses. And the man became offended. He got upset that for all of these so-called friends that he had, nobody wanted to come, because they knew in making the journey for the event that it was going to cost them a little bit. They were going to have to pay a price. They were going to have to make a journey to get there. And so the master got upset, and he says, "Well, you know what? Don't worry about them. Since they don't want to come, they're looking for all these excuses. Go out and get me anybody who would come." And I'm talking about the lame. I'm talking about the poor, the destitute. Just open this invitation up, because I want a full house when this celebration takes place. And that just reminds me so much of that other story where God is talking about cut off your right arm. You're better to get into the party with no arm than to go to hell in misery. So what I'm saying to you, men as well as women, just as Christ is seated at the right hand of the Father, so too the woman sits at the right hand of authority and power with her husband. She's to be a help. She's to be a source of strength. There's a lot of things that a man can do, but there's so many more things a man can do with a righteous and a God-honoring wife. So it's at a point of conversation where I see that there are going to be many men that are going to be maimed, in that they will have cut themselves off from a wife that, like the Hebrew people, were not faithful, were adulterers, were doing everything but what God commanded them to do, what God described that they should be doing when we look at Proverbs 31, starting around verse 10. God talks about what a virtuous wife does. And, I'd say the picture of the American woman is a stark contrast to what God says a virtuous woman is all about. And a virtuous woman definitely can have a career, but a virtuous woman has a family, and she orients all of her dealings and all of her thinking to her family, just as the husband is doing the same thing. So with that, I just would like to say that many of us have read that Bible, but few of us have actually lived it to really glean the true wisdom that's held within the pages of that book. And so I would just say this is another video to get men and women to think. And once you start thinking, you're going to have an opportunity to think clearly, especially if you're lining yourself up to honor and read and study God's Word. Because there is a famine in this world, but it's not a famine of food. It's a famine of true knowledge and wisdom. And even though the world is expanding in knowledge, it's not really expanding too much in wisdom. So many of us here in America have smartphones, and we are idiots compared to the phone. The phone has more smartness to it than we do because we are not taking advantage of what it can afford us. We will sit and look at videos that are idiotic for the better part of the day. We will listen to music videos to get in this, almost hypnotic state of being, enamored by these artists. And none of these things are really going to be helpful in terms of us having better relationships and doing those things that are truly of real value. Because I'd say most of you people, in fact, I'd say every person on this earth really can appreciate a good relationship, especially when they have one and they appreciate it. They recognize it as being valuable, and then they basically take provisions to keep it strong. So with that, I also depart. Peace to you all.